What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the movie Inside Out 2. Here's a quick synopsis. Riley, now a teenager, vying to make the high school hockey team while also trying to enjoy a weekend with her friends, begins feeling new emotions, anxiety, envy, embarrassment, and ennui. The film stars Amy Poehler, Maya Hawke, Tony Hale, Louis Black, Phyllis Smith, Lisa Lapira, Io Adebri, and Paul Walter Hauser. Standout performances. One thing that doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to Pixar is their history of picking interesting comedic actors to lead their films. Beginning with their first movie, Toy Story, with Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear and Tom Hanks as Woody. Then you have Dave Foley as Flint from A Bug's Life, John Goodman and Billy Crystal as Sully and Mike Wazowski in Monsters, Inc., Albert Brooks and Ellen DeGeneres as Marlin and Dory in Finding Nemo, Craig T. Nelson as Mr. Incredible in The Incredibles, Owen Wilson as Lightning McQueen in Cars, Patton Oswalt as Remy in Ratatouille, Ed Asner in Up as Carl, Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey in Soul as Joe Gardner and 22, and in Inside Out 1 and 2 you have Amy Poehler as Joy. What I find interesting about this list of actors is, yes, some of them are massive names, but others are people you would not expect to be picked to be the leads in a Disney animated film, and most of them have sitcom backgrounds. Pixar has gotten to a place where everyone wants to make a movie with them, and I find it admirable that for the most part, the studio has picked the best choices when it comes to actors, and you don't relate Pixar with comedy, and what these movies do so well is let the comedic talent bring their personality to these characters. Like with Joy, Poehler is playing a well-meaning control freak in the same vein as Leslie Knope in Parks and Recreation. There is a newcomer in Inside Out 2 who completely takes over this movie, and it's Maya Hawke as Anxiety. It's already on my list of favorite performances in a Pixar movie, and if you only know her from this and Stranger Things, do yourself a favor and watch the films Mainstream and Do Revenge. She was also very good in supporting roles in Wes Anderson's Asteroid City and Bradley Cooper's Maestro. Hawke is the real deal, and I really want to see her be given a leading role in a big movie. Something I talked about last week when discussing The Wild Robot is that usually the performances in animated movies that make an impact are the ones that are super funny. Yet again, that is not the case with Maya Hawke in Inside Out 2. The energy is so raw, it's kind of so emotional. It's off the walls cartoonish, like it feels like a performance that fits in a Roger Rabbit movie. Maya Hawke's next movie is Wilder and Me, co-starring Jon Hamm, Christoph Waltz, and John Turturro from director Stephen Frears. Let's talk about the overall state of Pixar. People were in a panic due to the fact that they put some movies on Disney Plus, Soul, Luca, and Turning Red, and had a box office disaster with Lightyear. And this movie is being thought of as a big bounce back, and I fight against that. I think Soul is one of their best films. Luca and Elemental are very good as well. And what really bothers me is the reason that this is being looked as a comeback is its massive success in theaters. Inside Out 2 has made $1.6 billion. That makes it the highest grossing animated film of all time. We as a society associate Pixar with two things: winning Oscars and making a lot of money. And I'm here to tell you that I don't care about either of those things. All I care about is the quality of the films themselves. The tricky thing about Pixar is whether they should concentrate on making new original films or should they make sequels to their beloved franchises. Toy Story, The Incredibles, and now Inside Out, they are very good at making sequels that stand on their own as great movies, but these movies 1000% benefit from the original films growing over time. Like, I think the almost 10-year gap between Inside Out and Inside Out 2 really helped Inside Out 2. Like, if there were only 5 years between Inside Out and Inside Out 2, I do not believe Inside Out 2 would have been the highest grossing animated film of all time. Here's what Pixar currently has on the docket. Elio, an original film with a voice cast that includes Zoe Saldana and Brad Garrett, who has previously lent his voice in the Pixar movies A Bug's Life, Finding Nemo, and Ratatouille. The studio is also making Toy Story 5 and Incredibles 3. I love the Toy Story movies, and I really love the first two Incredibles films. But when is enough is enough? I don't have the answer to that. I want to see Toy Story movies, but only because the 4 Toy Story movies I've seen have been excellent. The same with the Incredibles movies. And it does not take a rocket scientist to tell you they are going to make an Inside Out 3, and maybe they should, because Inside Out 2 was really, really good. And to give you more insight as to why Pixar is going to continue down the road of making sequels, here's some more box office talk. So like I said, Inside Out 2 is not only the highest grossing animated film ever, it's also currently the highest grossing film of 2024. It's the 5th Pixar movie to reach $1 billion. The others being Finding Dory, Toy Story 3, Toy Story 4, and The Incredibles 2. What do all 5 of these movies have in common? They are sequels, and their success is why Pixar is going to continue to make sequels. You just hope they remain high quality. And I think this is an interesting tidbit, so I'm going to share it. I just learned this fact that despite their box office dominance, DreamWorks animated movies have made more than Pixar movies, although not by much. DreamWorks animated films have combined to make $17.3 billion, while Pixar stands at $17 billion. To give some more context, DreamWorks Animation has made 49 movies, while Pixar has made 28. So last week on the podcast, I talked about a DreamWorks animated film, The Wild Robot. Now I'm talking about a Pixar movie. I am fascinated between the rivalry between these studios that make animated family movies. And early on in my lifetime, I think DreamWorks was viewed as the more lowbrow option. They made movies like Shrek. They made Kung Fu Panda. They made Madagascar, movies that are really fun, but after you watch them, you had a good time, you're not going to think about them again. And then Pixar was the one that was winning all of the Oscars. They were the one that were highbrow. And I think I can pinpoint the exact moment that happened for Pixar. I think it's the opening of Up. How sad and heartfelt that opening is. I think that's when people started to view that as, oh, this is what Pixar is. They deliver this emotion to the screens. While with DreamWorks, I think we used to think of those movies as just a good time to hear Smash Mouth songs. But now here we are in 2024, where it's DreamWorks who's making an original film in The Wild Robot that is being called profound, and it's Pixar is the one making a sequel to one of their beloved films. I want to get into how I feel about Inside Out 2. I think it's a movie I really like. I just told you I really loved Maya Hawke in this movie. Amy Poehler is really good, but it didn't feel like an animated movie that I hadn't seen before, and that's usually something that Pixar delivers. I had never seen a movie like Up before I saw Up. I had never seen a movie like Soul. And what do those two films have in common? They were directed and co-written by Pete Docter, who I believe is one of the best animated film directors of all time. He is the man who directed the first Inside Out film and also directed Monsters, Inc. Now instead of writing and directing movies for the company, he's the chief creative officer. I'm sure he's doing a great job running the company, but I think they need him to start making movies again as a writer-director. I think he's one of the most innovative animated filmmakers of all time. Last week on this very podcast, I was talking about how great of a job Chris Sanders did writing and directing The Wild Robot. Pixar needs a filmmaker like that, and they have that one in-house. It's Pete Docter. He has always been their most significant filmmaker. Up, Inside Out, and Soul all won Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. That's the record for a director winning that award. And I felt his absence with Inside Out 2. Like, I think they would have made this sequel very differently if he wrote and directed the movie. He would have brought the movie new new ideas and it would have felt different. I thought this was a very good movie, but it felt very standard and like a sequel. Pixar is a company that has been rewarded in the past for taking risk. I just don't feel like Inside Out 2 was a creative risk at all. I'm talking about movies like WALL-E, where Peter Docter is the one who came up with the original story for that film. I mean, that lead character does not talk. That is the type of movie I'm talking about, where that comes out of nowhere and people love it. That's what I'm used to when it comes to Pixar. And I do think we've been getting a little bit of that lately with Luca, with Soul, with Turning Red. But my fear is that Pixar looks at those movies as failures because they didn't succeed in the public eye. So now what they're going to try to do is to make sequels to their films at an even higher rate. I don't think anybody wants to see Cars 4. And I think they learned a lesson on Lightyear that people don't want to see their characters in new situations. Like, that's what that problem with that movie was. That wasn't their version of Lightyear. So nobody was a fan of that movie, even though that movie is kind of a cool idea. This is a thought I had lately. Pixar isn't only competing with DreamWorks Animation, it's also competing with the other Disney animated films. I mean, when Pixar was at their absolute peak in the mid-2000s, Disney Animation was going through a rough patch. Their hand-drawn animated films were tiring out. They weren't making hits. And then came movies like Frozen, like Zootopia, like Moana. Those are beloved films from children, and adults love those movies as well. Other Disney animated films have won Best Animated Feature. Big Hero 6, one of my favorite movies, won Best Animated Feature, and so did Encanto. My point is, I think it's becoming even harder and harder for Pixar to stand out against the rest. I mean, they were clearly the kings. They made a movie. They knew they were going to get an audience. They knew they were going to win an Oscar for Best Animated Feature. There was no real competition. It always felt like, oh, this is the new Pixar movie. Your mind is going to be blown. Now, one thing that has me super excited about the future of the company is that they are going back to some of their best filmmakers. Andrew Stanton is going to be directing Toy Story 5. I mean, he previously directed Finding Nemo and WALL-E, along with Finding Dory. And Brad Bird, who directed Ratatouille, Incredibles, and Incredibles 2, is coming back to direct Incredibles 3. He's also the filmmaker behind The Iron Giant. Listen, I would understand if you think I'm being too negative about Pixar right now. I really liked Inside Out 2, but I don't think anybody is going to walk away from this movie and say, oh, this is Pixar's absolute best movie. And they went on a run there where it was like, oh, every movie they're going to make, you're going to say to yourself, oh, is this their best movie? Toy Story 2 at one point, I thought, was their absolute best movie. Up was their best movie. Toy Story 3 was their best movie. Currently, I have Soul as my favorite Pixar movie. And the reason for that is because of the performances, but also because of the look of that movie. It doesn't look like any other animated movie they have made before. I think one of my problems with Inside Out 2 is that it looks like Inside Out. And I know that's an unjust criticism because obviously it's going to look like the original movie. It's a sequel to that movie. But I love it most when Pixar is surprising you with the look of their films. So on one hand, I watch this movie and I go, this movie is really relatable. We all have different feelings when we are a teenager. But then I also think to myself at other points, is this movie too simple about what being a teenager is like? And should Pixar really be making a movie about becoming a teenager? Like, are they the right animated studio to make a movie like this? Because what they did with this movie is they really simplified it. Oh, what you do to become friends with other teenagers is you say you like the music they like. You like doing the things they like to do. You come into peer pressure, and I feel like this is a very simple idea for a Pixar movie. And a lot of their movies get this title as tearjerkers. I don't think this movie is a tearjerker. Like, I don't think it's saying anything that we all don't already know. Oscar chances in any other year, this movie would be the prohibitive favorite to win Best Animated Feature, but this year it is going up against The Wild Robot from DreamWorks Animation. animation. And I do believe that The Wild Robot is going to win, but I would never count out a Pixar movie from coming in and taking home this award. Do I think this movie should win Best Animated Feature? No, because I do not believe it is the best animated film from this year. I believe that honor goes to The Wild Robot, a movie that I think works better on an emotional level than Inside Out 2. And I'm not saying this to bash the movie, but really the only thing I'm going to remember about this movie in the long run is Maya Hawke as Anxiety. That's the performance. That's the thing that I'm going to remember, and that is memorable. It justifies the movie's existence in my mind. A great animated vocal performance like that absolutely justifies this movie. I will fight anyone who says that this movie is on the same level as any of the Toy Story movies, the original Inside Out, Up, or Soul. Like, it's just not on that level. It's not on that level of a film. It's not as surprising. It's not as relatable. The first Inside Out film is just deeper to me. It's about someone moving. Like, that is something that we all do at some point in our lives, living in a new place. This one is Riley going to make the hockey team, and is she going to remain friends with her friends? Like, the scale is just so small to me here. The stakes are absolutely non-existent. Overall, Inside Out 2 is better than most sequels, but it is not a sequel that is on par with the original film. It's nowhere near on that movie's level. I can say all I want about this film, but the film is winning in a popularity level. I mean, it's winning. It's the highest grossing movie of the year. It's the highest grossing animated film ever. I don't know if it's a movie that's going to last in the zeitgeist. Like, I don't think that the kids who watch this film 10 years from now are still going to be saying, oh wow, Inside Out 2 is one of the best movies out there. The way that we will still be talking about the original Inside Out film. The way that we're still talking about Toy Story, Finding Nemo. That's what Pixar movies are being rated against. It's not, are they big hits at the time? It's not, do they win the best animated feature at the Oscars? It's, are you still talking about them years, decades later? And that's what makes Pixar stand out against a lot of their competition, is that they make super memorable films. And for as much as I like Inside Out 2 and think that it is better than most animated movies, I cannot call that movie one of those films. I'm not usually an anti-sequel guy. If you want to make a sequel to a movie, go right ahead. But when it comes to animated films, I do want to see something different every time. And that's what's so great about the Toy Story franchise. Each film in the franchise feels very different and feels like it has something new to say. And there is a real cynic in me that believes that possibly they only made this movie because they had a slew of movies that were not super hits and they wanted a surefire hit. And I can't say that I blame them, because if that's what they wanted, that's what they got. The movie made $1.6 billion. So in that sense, it is a gigantic success. But if we are talking, is it a top 5, top 10 Pixar movie of all time? In my opinion, absolutely not. Inside Out 2 will never get near that list. Are my expectations for Pixar movies far too high? Probably, but can you blame me? I mean, I've grown up with Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Up, Monsters Inc., Incredibles. I mean, the list goes on and on. These people have been the masters of making brilliant animated films. They have very high standards, and I'm holding them to those standards. One of the reactions to this movie that actually really did annoy me was all those people that said, oh, see, this is what happens when you put a Pixar movie in movie theaters. This movie's success has everything to do with the fact that it is a sequel to Inside Out, a movie that is universally loved. Not every Pixar movie that goes to movie theaters makes $1 billion. 5 of their movies have reached the $1 billion plateau, and they are all sequel films. And I'll go out on a limb right now and predict this. Toy Story 5 will make over $1 billion. Incredibles 3 will make over $1 billion. And whenever Inside Out 3 happens, it's going to make, you guessed it, over $1 billion. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I do recommend you check out Inside Out 2. Next week on the podcast, I'm talking about Jason Reitman's Saturday Night. So tune into that and please rate, review, and subscribe.